Thank you, Nikita. Before we move on to our next session, we have a poll for you. Please click the icon next to your chat box to access the poll. Now, for this session, we will be discussing empowering through wealth, getting a voice and gaining respect. It is my pleasure to invite Dr. Kalpana Kochar, who will be chairing this session. Dr. Kochar is the Director of Development Policy and Finance of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She was the former director of the Human Resources Department of the IMF. Her research interests are emerging markets, including India, China, and regional integration in South Asia. Before I hand it over to Dr. Kochar, we would like to take you through the journey of two women who are building their wealth from two different walks of life. We have a Seva sister, Rani Ben, representing the rural sector, and Rashi Naran, the founder of Heads Up for Tails, representing the urban sector.
રાણીબેન છે, મારું ગામ જાફતરું છે, તાલુકો સંતરપુર છે, જિલ્લો પાટણ છે અને હું ભરતની એક કામદાર બેન તો હતી. પરમનું અમારું ભરતકામ તો હતું બાપ પેઢીનું, પણ અમે ઘર માટે કરતા. જ્યારે સેવા આવી અને 35 વર્ષે હું સેવા સાથે જોડાઉં છું. સેવા આવી, મારા ઘરવાળા બહાર હતા, 8 મહિના બહાર રહેતા હતા, 6 મહિના 4 મહિના ઘર દેતા હતા અને મને નાના છોકરા હતા, કોઈ ચડી જતું નહીં મજૂરી. તોરણ એક આવ્યું 250 રૂપિયાનું, એટલે ચાર્જની અંદર મેં 250 રૂપિયાનું તોરણ કરી નાખ્યું. એટલે મેં મારા ઘરવાળાને ટપાલ લખી કે તમે ઘરે આવી જાઓ. તો કે કેમ? મેં કીધું મને એક સેવા આવી છે, ଯଦି હું ઓળખું નહીં, સેવા છે તો મને 250 રૂપિયાનું ભરતકામ મળ્યું છે, તો હું 250 રૂપિયા કમાણી અને તમે 12 મહિને 250 રૂપિયા કમાશો. તો કઈ તાત્કાલિક ઘરે આવી ગયા, ટપાલ મળ્યા ભેરી અને ત્યાં મેં કીધું હવે તમે મને મદદ કરો. એટલે પોતે કે તને મદદ કરવું હોય હાચું, હું ઘર સંભળું, તમે મને મદદ કરો. આપણા કને ખેતી નથી, આપણા કને મકાન નથી, તો આપણે ભાડા મકાનમાં રહેવાનું છે. તો હું રાતના 4 વાગ્યા સુધી કામ કરતી હતી. એમ કરીને હું મહિનાના 3 થી 4 હજાર રૂપિયા ચૂકવણું લેતી હતી. એમ છું ત્યાં સેવા કે તમે આગેવાન તમે બનાવવાના છે. ત્યાં મેં 80 બેને ભરતકામ અપાયું અને એ બારે થણ કરતા હતા. હા, ગરીબમાં ગરીબ હતા, પરિસ્થિતિ ખરાબ હતી, 1% મને મળતું હતું ખાવાનું, તો હું ભૂખી હોઈ રહેતી હતી અને કોઈ અમારી સમાજની અંદર કોઈ ગરીબ બહેનનો વિડીયો હતો નહીં. ત્યાં જયારે સેવા આવી ત્યાં ભરતકામ અમે કર્યું, તો હું મહિનાનું 3000 રૂપિયા કમાતી થઈ. તો મેં 10,000 રૂપિયા ભેળા છે, એટલે મેં 5 મકાન ખરીદ્યું. મેં કીધું આપણે ભાડે મકાન નહીં, ઘેરું મકાન લઈ લઈએ. 10 વર્ષની મેં મુદતે 10,000 રૂપિયા બેન આપ્યા. ત્યારે મારી કમાણી હાથની હતી. ત્યારે મેં તમારા ભાઈને એવું બોલી કે જો આ 10,000 રૂપિયા આપણે મકાનમાં આપીએ અને બાકીની હું બચત કરું. તો મેં બચત ચાલુ કરી, એટલે પોતે ના પાડી. તો મારા 5-4 હજાર રૂપિયા મહિને કમાતી શીખી છે, તો એમાંથી 1000 રૂપિયા હું કાઢી દઉં અને તમારા ભાઈને એમ જ કહું કે 5,000 રૂપિયા મારે મહેનતાણું મળ્યું છે. એટલે મેં મારી છોકરીને 700 રૂપિયા ભણાવી અને બેટા તું ઘરકામ કરી અને મારા ઘરે મદદ કરી. તો મારી છોકરી મદદ કરે, હું મદદ કરું, તો હું 8 થી 9,000 રૂપિયા મહિને કમાવા માંડી. મહિને 9,000 રૂપિયા કમાવા માંડી. એટલે એમ કરીને મારે 60-70,000 રૂપિયા મારે સાથમાં છે. બચત તો કરતી જ હતી. ત્યાં એની મેં 3 વીઘા જમીન ખરીદી. એટલે તમારો ભાઈ કે હવે જમીન તો આપણે ખરીદી, પણ આપણે કેને નામે કરશું? મારી માલિકી. અમે મા દીકરી કમાણી. તમે ભલે ઘર હાથ આમ ઝઘડાથી નહીં, તમે ઘર હાથ પણ મારી માલિકી નહીં. તમારી કલાઈ તમારું પર થઈ જાય તો મારું ધણી કોણ? તો મારા કને કાંક મારી મૂડી હોય તો હું પગ ઘર ઉભી રહી શકું. તો એટલી અમે સેવામાં જોડાણે ત્યારે સમજણ આવી. ત્યાં સેવામાં જોડાણે એટલી અમે સમજણ આવી અને ત્યાં મેં 3 વીઘા જમીન ખરીદી, મારા નામથી કરી. તો અત્યારે હું ખેતી કરી જાણું છું. મારા ઘરવાળો પણ બહાર નથી જતા, એ ખેતી કરે છે, મારા છોકરા પણ ખેતી કરે છે અને મને પણ મદદ પણ અત્યારે કરે છે, મદદરૂપી પણ થાય છે. અને જમીન મારા નામે કરી અને બચત પણ કરી અને બચત કરતા અત્યારે મારે જો બચત વાપરવી હોય તો મારી મંજૂરી લેવી જોઈએ છે. નકા મારા કને કાંઈ ના તો મને કોણ ઓળખે? અને અત્યારે મારા સમાજની અંદર મારું એટલું માન છે કે મને કોઈ બી પ્રસંગ હોય, તલાટી હોય, મામલતદાર હોય, ટીડીઓ હોય, ગામમાં કોઈ બી સારું કામ થતું હોય તો કે છે સેવાવાળી બેનને બોલાવો. આ તો શ્રમ જેવી સેવા, ગરીબ બેનની સેવા, કોઈ હાથ ન ચાલે. તો અમારી માલિકી અત્યારે અમારો પણ ખુદનો સેલ ઓર્ડર છે, બેસી અમે અમારી કંપની પણ છે, અમે પોતે અમે ખુદ માલિક છીએ. નકર તો મોટા મોટા પૈસાવાળા હોય ને એની કંપની હોય, અમારી કંપની ન હોય ગરીબ બેનની. તો અત્યારે મારા 15,000 બહેનો પણ અત્યારે પગ ભરશે અને બધીને સમજણ છે, એક મને નહીં, બધું કામ કરતી થઈ ગયું છે, બધી બચત કરતી થઈ ગયું છે. અને મારા ઘરવાળાને કદાચ થઈ જાય તો બીજે બુઢા આશ્રમમાં મેળાય ને, એ મારા બુઢા આશ્રમમાં નહીં જવું જોઈએ. મારા સાથે સેવા છે, મારા સાથે મારી મૂડી છે. જયારે મારા હાથ પગ નહીં આવે, મારી દીકરીની બહુ નહીં કરે ને, તો હું કોકને મારા કને પૈસા આવે છે તો 5 રૂપિયા દઈને કામ કરાવી શકીશ. જય સેવા.
Hi, I'm Rashi Narang, and being a woman has never really come in the way of me being able to get funding for my business. At least I don't believe that it ever has. In fact, there are so many times when I ask investors why are not enough women-led businesses getting funded, and all of them tell me that there aren't enough women coming forward and opting to really take this route. I'm not denying the existence of gender discrimination or bias, or that society over so many years has really conditioned us women to think that it's harder for us, or we can't do it without the support of men. But even then, there are so many shining examples in the world, like Sara Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx, or Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, who's the founder of Biocon, who have shown us that discrimination does not stand a chance against passion and perseverance. I spend my earnings on running my home, taking care of my family, and indulging in things that bring me joy, like travel. I started thinking about savings and concepts like net worth only very recently. And I do believe that that is the case with most women and actually most people. Unfortunately, things like financial education that matters so much is never really taught to us. I mean, when I think back to school, things like trigonometry or the Pythagoras theorem, those never have really come handy in life, but I remember spending so much time studying about them. Financial education, I believe, needs to become a part of curriculum so that everybody understands how to build wealth and lead an independent life without feeling lost when it comes to matters of money. It is only now that I have started my journey of understanding how money works and building a positive relationship with it. The only prominent fear that I have is in terms of health. I worry about the health of my family, especially in the future, as we grow older. I think that this part of life is so unpredictable, and we see so much suffering in terms of how expensive healthcare can be, that I believe that we need to be prepared in terms of medical insurance and other healthcare preventions and protections. I would urge everyone to plan for the future for unexpected medical interventions. I think it is important for every woman to gain financial literacy, and then savings, net worth, etc. All of this will just follow. I've seen women in my own family, like my aunts, my grandparents, be completely lost about finances when their husbands have passed away. And to me, that's extremely scary. I think it's so important, it's essential that all women manage their own money, know what they have, and have the autonomy to decide what they want to do with it. I think that the challenges for women in my network in building out their personal net worth is just basic knowledge about finance. It seems intimidating, overwhelming, complicated, that it just feels easier to stay away from it and let someone else handle that part of life. Other challenges are lack of time and focus, plus a helping hand, someone reliable who will really be willing to offer the right kind of guidance.
Wonderful. We've heard from 2 women, very different backgrounds, about their journey to save and build their wealth, and truly inspirational in their own ways. Rani Ben's story is one where she was able to start an embroidery business thanks to Seva. And with the additional income she earned and the savings she put away, she built a home. She bought land in her own name. She gained financial security and respect in her community. In fact, is seen as something of a leader in her community, and has provided for her old age. So we also heard from Rashi about the importance of financial literacy and planning for healthcare costs, for financial shocks. Actually, that's a very important point that I wanted to double down on for a brief minute. Especially when you're young, you don't necessarily think, and this applies to men, women, everybody, you don't necessarily think about, what might happen when you're older and so on. And when you're unable to protect yourself from health-related issues. So that was an excellent point I thought that Rashi made. Now, let me also put their individual stories into a broader global context. Globally, over 380 million women and girls live in extreme poverty, and extreme poverty, just for those of you who don't know, it's living on less than $1.90 per day. COVID-19 has jeopardized progress on poverty reduction. Actually, it has reversed previous gains by about 4 to 10 years by some estimates. This is not important only for women themselves, but for societies at large. We know that women invest more in health and education of their children. This has been documented evidence. But we also know that they have much lower capacity to earn income, build wealth, and have much less control over their finances. Income inequality and poverty are driven in large part by differences in earnings from paid work. Women earn less because they perform a much larger share of unpaid care work. In India, it's estimated that women take on close to 90% of unpaid care work, whether it's childcare, house care, elder care, whatever. They spend less time in the workforce than men on average. And then they have different it's called occupational segregation. Women tend to be in occupations that pay lower wages anyway. And then even when they are in the same fields or the same areas of occupation, they have lower wages because of gender-based discrimination. So these factors are deeply interlinked with pervasive social norms. Now, women's labor force participation, so participating in the active labor force, in the paid labor force, is projected to remain below pre-pandemic levels in 169 countries of the world. So we really need to be paying attention to women's work and to the burden of unpaid unpaid care work, I should say. But inequality and poverty are also driven by differences in unearned income, including capital income. In patriarchal societies, women's inheritance of property or wealth is still restricted by legal barriers. And even in cases where such legal barriers no longer exist, customs and norms prevent women from accessing and leveraging capital and taking advantage of financial services. Now, some of that could be that they're just not educated enough to ask for it, as Rashi mentioned, but nevertheless, this is the case. Keep in mind that women live longer than men, but the vast majority of them are uninsured. And according to the new Wealth Equity Index, which is calculated for 39 advanced countries only, women accumulate only 74% of the wealth that men have at retirement. And of course, you can imagine that this number is going to be much, much lower if you include developing countries. This gender wealth gap, I think, is a more holistic measure of inequality because it takes into account investments, emergency savings, inheritances, and so on. And since it is true that it takes money to make money, wealth gaps are also a good predictor of future inequality. So how can we improve women's economic security, which is critical for sustainable development? What innovative approaches are needed to advance financial inclusion and in insurance and banking to enable women to build and preserve their wealth? I have a wonderful panel that's coming up to help us examine the criticality of this issue, discuss some of the key roadblocks to building women's wealth, and suggest some potential solutions. I will start with a round of questions to each speaker, but then I'm hoping that we will generate a conversation towards the end. Let me start with Anita George. She is the co-founding partner of Edina Sustainability Fund. Ms. George has a solid track record of managing global investment portfolios and infrastructure, specifically in the energy, oil and gas, mining, water, transportation, and logistics sectors. I have the great privilege of having met Anita several years ago and getting to know her, and it is my privilege to welcome her to this panel. So Anita, let me turn to you. You've managed investments across this broad range of sectors that I mentioned, and I'm sure some I didn't mention. What do you think some of the common factors are, the key factors that impact women's capacity to be financially independent? Are there common factors that could help promote women's financial inclusion and their representation in startups or in recipients of financing? Over to you, Anita. You have about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Kalpana, and it's a real pleasure to be here at this Talentnomics conference. I think the good news about women is that there are more women on, I would say, both the professional side as well as homemakers and women working at home who, partly due to the pandemic, actually saw the potential to add to the family income by creating small businesses, etc. And this, I think, I see a perceptible difference, although on the macro level, a lot of women were adversely affected by the pandemic in terms of having to either stay home for childcare, etc. But that also became an inspiration for getting women to think about how can they earn additional money. And just as we saw in these 2 videos, there's really a lot of opportunity that women are slowly taking up, and role models and examples are very, very important. Before I go any further, I actually want to take a minute to remember Ela Bhatt, Ela Ben, as we all fondly called her, who just recently passed away. And what I think is that the kind of work Ela Ben did of creating access to finance. So first and foremost is access to finance. But as we saw from the video of the Seva Rani Ben, that it's also access to information, access to opportunity, and the ability to have that guidance. So all along, she gave us a lot of very important clues. If you remember, she spoke about secret savings. And this is something which society kind of assumes that the man is in charge of the money, even if the woman is earning it. And one of the things that I saw in my professional life, although I've not been in wealth management, but really on the investment side, is that even in family-owned businesses where the women have actually been the source of wealth is really with the men. And that's a big stigma, I think, that one has to slowly, and that's like a slow revolution. Having said that, having the kind of access that Rani Ben had really makes all the difference. And she was able to shatter a lot of the societal expectations, both explicitly as well as implicitly. And that financial independence also gave her identity, gave her the ability to have a voice and to manage her own finances in a way that made her less vulnerable. So information asymmetry is another common factor that I see across all walks of life, where women generally either don't have access to information or are presume that they are not going to be able to understand, so they hand it over either to their husbands or their sons to take care of that. And I think now I'm seeing more and more, and Rahul from Avanti will speak to that as well as Farzana from Delta Green, of platforms that are actually focusing on providing that basic literature, financial inclusion, and somewhat tilting the information asymmetry that exists on financial services for women. The other interesting factor is that especially in India, in the context of the boom of startups, so initially, and now that's my new world with my fund Edina. So initially we were seeing only really men. I had to look very hard to find a woman founder, but more and more we are coming across women founders who are passionate about what they want to do, are very organized, are very savvy, and are also targeting demand from other women like themselves. And therefore, they are much more focused on, having products and services that meet the needs of women. So you would have heard of many different financial platforms that are coming up, which are women owned, women run, and with a focus on providing financial inclusion for women. The last point I'd like to make, which was made by both women in the videos, was vulnerability. And something that we saw again with the pandemic was a lot of women like Rani Ben, and Seva has close to 2 million women. But an event like that can really destabilize and move out of being financially sustainable to extreme poverty. So that thin line that we see is not just a loss of livelihood, but it's also a loss of all the other things that go with financial independence, identity, ability to save, etc. So one of the key features that I've been working on with Seva in their livelihood recovery and resilience fund is to have that kind of resilience and a product and service that can provide resilience to women. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Anita. Rahul, let me turn to you now. Rahul Gupta, for those of you who don't know, is the Chief Executive Officer of Avanti Finance. Avanti's vision is to provide affordable financial services to the next 100 million unserved and underserved households, leveraging new age digital technologies. I'm very excited to hear from Rahul. Rahul, you're working on providing financial services, as I just mentioned, to underserved populations. According to the World Bank's Global Findex data, only 10% of women in India have actually borrowed from a financial institution, compared with 15% of men, which is still low. Avanti Finance has partnered with Seva and others to target women specifically. Tell us a little bit about how you're helping women become more financially secure. What are some of the key challenges you're facing, and how is technology helping? And I'm sure that the audience is really excited to hear about this because it's the way of the future. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Kalpana, and thanks for the invite to this meeting today. So our vision, as you mentioned, is to provide access in an affordable manner to formal financial services to the next 100 million households which have been excluded. Now let's take that in an Indian context. You shared some interesting worldwide data. Now about 60% of Indian households are dependent on agriculture for livelihoods. And 80% of those are actually smallholder farmers with land holdings of less than 2 acres, which essentially puts them in the low income, bottom of the pyramid category. And out of those, less than 30% have the ability to borrow from a formal financial institution. And about 50% don't have the gravitas to really borrow from anyone. So I think the first thing is, the huge lack of agency or opportunity purely from an access perspective. And so from an access perspective, what we are doing is partnering with organizations like Seva And we have, about 60, 65 organizations consisting of small MFIs, ag tech players, social enterprises, which have a lot of respect and are deeply entrenched in the communities they serve. So they help us reach this target audience and help us onboard these customers onto our digital platform. So let's talk a little bit about access. So when you talk about a digital delivery model, a lot of the people that we're targeting don't even have smartphones. So about 90% of Avanti's customer base comprises of women, but only about 40% of them have a smartphone at a household level. So their ability to interact directly with an app doesn't exist, so you can't have a B2C model. So what we did is we formed partnerships with mission-aligned entities who help reach these customers and onboard these customers through our app. So it's a very frictionless process for these ladies who will come and share the data asked for in a verbal interview, which is then put into the app, and then that helps us decide on the amount of loan to give to them, etc. The second is the say that the ladies have in terms of the loan product they want, which is fit for purpose. So, straight-jacketed loans don't create impact stories. Impact stories are created when the loan purpose is linked to the income generation and livelihood opportunities that they create. So if a woman customer of ours is saying, I want to borrow 40,000 rupees from you for my dairy business, and I have a cooperative that will guarantee the offtake of dairy. And that allows her to then express her desire of saying the loan should be either 12 months or 18 months or 24 months, depending on her earnings and affordability to repay. Whether the repayment tenor should be weekly, fortnightly, monthly, based on the income that she generates. So building that hyper-local context, in addition to providing the accessibility, is also very important. Affordability is the next leg, and which is also linked to education, where people have to understand the cost of borrowings and what over a period of time they can do through managing their loans, managing their own credit history. A lot of them are first-time borrowers or new to credit, as we call them, who build their digital financial footprint the first time through a transaction with Avanti. And that then leads to future empowerment and their ability to open up many doors to avail of formal financial services. Seva is a unique case where they actually encourage their members to first save, and then based on that savings, they take a loan. Because credit is not the sort of a be-all solution, because we have to go beyond credit to insurance and savings, etc. So I think accessibility, loan products that are fit for purpose, financial literacy, so that they are able to understand and manage what they sign for, and then ensuring that loan product that they originally sign up for creates additional income generation for them so that they live better, save better, are more in control of their finances. One has to look at this whole thing. And we're trying to bring this together in a digital delivery model, in an assisted mode through the various community organizations that we have. And why digital is important? Because it's scalable. Over a period of time, it reduces friction and cost. So the landed cost to the end borrowers becomes better. And the time that they take to do a transaction is much lesser. And one has to also see that in order to avail of a loan, people don't want to lose a day or 2 days earnings because of the process that it takes. So one has to be, sensitive right to that level.
If you don't mind, Rahul, can I ask you a quick follow-up, and before I move on to the next speaker? When you do employ this assisted digital delivery model, where you have somebody who translates verbally what people are saying into onto a digital platform. Do you see women then sort of gaining those skills themselves, so that over time they're able to do it themselves, provided, of course, that they have a smartphone or some kind of device?
We see that the adoption to digital is actually very quick. And the challenge right now is the penetration of smartphones and some of the social norms that are unique to, let's say, a culture like ours, where it's okay for a man to be browsing around on the smartphone the whole day long, but it's not okay for a woman to have a smartphone, because that gives her more empowerment in terms of the information that she consumes. So that's kind of the sort of social challenge. But with the cost of, sort of getting, becoming more mature in that area, the further proliferation of smartphones, the reduction of costs, where, for less than $100, you can get a smartphone, which pretty much would do what most things need to be done on a phone. We think that the usage will grow exponentially, and the adoption to digital delivery forms in financial services or in other industries as well, it's not going to be linear. This is going to be very exponential over the next few years.
Great to hear. Very exciting. Let me thank you, Rahul. Farzana, let me turn to you now. Farzana is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Green Delta Insurance Company, GDIC, the only non-life insurance company in Bangladesh, receiving a AAA credit rating for the 9th consecutive year. GDIC is also the first and only insurance company in Bangladesh to earn the Super Brands recognition and have equity partnership with the IFC, the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group. Welcome, Farzana. You're doing some incredible work in the insurance sector, specifically focused on women. Can you tell us how insurance, or lack thereof, is impacting women's ability to build their wealth? And what challenges have you faced in increasing penetration? I will say, people don't usually think about it. When they think about financial access, they're thinking very simply about, do you have access to a bank account? Do you have access to the money? Do you have some autonomy over it? So very interesting, very interested to hear about your experience with insurance products. Over to you, Farzana.
Thank you, Kalpana. First of all, I would say that insurance in Bangladesh is very, I would say, misunderstood, and people have misperception, and the awareness of insurance is pretty low. And since I have a diverse work experience in microfinance and then small and medium enterprise commercial banking, and then into insurance. So that first I found that, we need to do something for women, access to insurance for the women. And that's how it started. And when we started, it backfired as usual, because people don't understand insurance and don't have confidence, and let alone, the women, they don't have access. So we did some surveys and all, and we came up with the product, which was actually, UN recognized me as a SDG pioneer in 2016 in women economic security. So what we found out that, when we sell a product, an insurance, it's actually selling their dreams. So it has to be, everyone talked about, women needs to have access to information, access to healthcare,
Hear you.
Insurance. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Sana,
So
your screen had frozen for a couple of seconds.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. So access to info. So this was the turning point, and so when we started, women didn't want to, and we had the value-added services in addition to the insurance coverage. That's how the women started coming to us. But the unique concept of this, the unique feature of this insurance policy was, access to law enforcement agencies, and also giving some allowance for, those who are, those who are exposed to road bullies and acid victims and all. So when we thought that, okay, women are not expressive, they don't want to come forward. So we took the help of the technology. So the app really helped, which Rahul was saying, that app actually, through our, women officers, because it didn't work out with the men first. So it was really helpful for women to have access. Those women who actually didn't have any access to finance or any bank or any institutions, through taking the policy, our policyholders had access to all those institutions. Like, for instance, like one woman in Jashore, she was just had her husband had a Nibedita insurance for her. So when there was a claim, then she understood the importance of insurance, and then they came to us that we acted as a facilitator, and she wanted to take a bank loan for our clinic. So this is how she's now an owner of a clinic, having more than 100 people working for her. So this is how he's income generating, and also her assets are building. And another one is from Borguna. She had a kind of a tailor shop, and then it was caught under fire. And with the claim amount, she bought a sewing machine, and also had an access to bank loan, and then started her another tailor shop. Not only that, she went to agriculture. So this is how we gave training, like the financial literacy training is very important for the bank, for bank to provide loans for so we have arrangements with the banks. So before taking the loan, we provide the financial literacy training to our women entrepreneurs who has taken the policies. So this is how the number has grown. We have reached out to more than 25,000 women who actually are taking this insurance policy. So it's actually improving the livelihood. The major focus was improving the livelihood and access to the independent decision making. By having the apps, it was easier for her to make decisions, not ask her spouse to whether I can take this policy or not. This was helpful for us. And not only that, the total ecosystem, so we helped them to get a policy, to help to the hospital, nearby hospital, where they can have the cashless facilities and healthcare facilities, trainings, and also counseling, which we have actually, there are a lot of counseling sessions are going on, the mental health care. So after the COVID, it really helped us. So for women, to increase their income, and also the equal pay, like everyone said that they don't get paid for the services that they do for households and all. So our motto is to reach out to the not only the urban segments, but also to the marginal segments. So that's how we actually segregated our Nibedita products into 3 products, so that we go to the workers level as well. So this is how we're trying to improve the livelihood of women of all walks of life. And the challenges, what yours? Sorry, I forgot to mention the challenges. Of course, the challenges we face, I actually mentioned, they didn't want to come forward, social security, and also we tried to act as a mediator, so that Nibedita is not only a policy, it's a platform, a one-stop service platform for women to get everything what she wants.
A quick follow-up, Farzana. When you talk about literacy, is that also important for men? Of
course.
Yeah. One cannot assume that men all understand much of this themselves, I'm sure. But Maybe we'll come back to that in the. Okay, go
yes,
ahead.
okay. Of course, I mean, it is very important for men to understand when we do the training. So we actually bring them their spouse also to understand, what loan she's taking, because sometimes the spouses, mostly they're helping them. So they need to understand how to utilize the fund. So the sources of fund, the disbursements of fund, and also not only that, we also tag our insurance officers and the bank loan officers so that they understand why the women are taking the loans, and so that it's easier for them to customize the product for them. And not only
Awesome.
that, so that they can have access to the deposit products as well, so that they
Yeah.
have more FDRs.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Rahul, please.
this is one man who's still learning, and I wish all that I know today I knew 20 years back. And that also, it's like referring to the video we saw of Rashi, who of course is a very successful entrepreneur. Why this should be almost like a part of early curriculum. To,
Absolutely.
Financial literacy, at very early stage of life.
Couldn't agree more. But let me bring Nisha into the conversation now. Nisha, she's an economist who's worked on poverty, inequality, and social development issues for a very long time, more than 30 years. She was the first CEO of Oxfam India for 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. During this period, she focused on Oxfam's work on the most lagging states and the most marginalized groups, including a strong focus on gender equality issues. So Nisha, and I've known Nisha a long time, and it's a great pleasure to have you here, Nisha. We heard from Rani Ben's story at the beginning about the importance of women owning land under their own name. But legal systems and the patriarchal society that we live in heavily limit what women can inherit. In India, only about 10% of women have sole home ownership. This impacts their ability to borrow, of course, using land or their home as collateral, invest, earn, build wealth. Ultimately, it increases their dependence on their sons or their husbands or some other male member of the family. Sort of help us understand the criticality of this issue. How can we address these barriers? Where are you seeing some positive progress, and how do we move forward? Over to you, Nisha.
Thanks so much, Kalpana. It's great to be on this panel. And I'm glad you put me last, because I think it was nice to hear the inspiring and encouraging stories first, because on property rights, it's not an area where we are making so much progress. If you look at, we are saying we want to create a universe, equiverse. We are at about 10 to 15% as opposed to 50%. I think property rights and political voice and empowerment are the two areas where we're kind of stuck at that very low level. Also where we don't see a lot of progress over time. I think when the bank did its report on gender and development a few years ago, it said these were the big, what it called sticky issues. And the reason is because it is a zero-sum game. There are fixed assets that need to be redistributed. There are a fixed number of seats in parliament that need to be redistributed. They're in the hands of men, and those with power don't want to give it up for those who don't have it. So it's a very different kind of issue from improving health or education or finance, where as a country grows and develops, there's more resources for everybody, and men and women both can benefit together from it. We were hearing yesterday from some of the speakers about the gender equality indices and how it's going to take us more than 100 or 200 years to reach parity. And on this one, if it's business as usual, I don't think we will ever reach parity. So we really need to do something very, very transformative. Now, we came, as you said, I was with Oxfam. We were working a lot with women farmers. And in India, the bulk of agriculture is being done by women. Men have largely migrated to, in many villages, you hardly saw any men. They had migrated to urban areas for informal sector jobs, and the women were doing the agricultural work, and not having property in their names was a big barrier for access to credit, moving beyond sort of self-help groups and so on. India is one of the few countries, I think, very fortunate to have a good law, inheritance law, the Hindu Succession Act, which was revised in 2005. So it covers 84% of the population at least. But even after so many years, it remains largely on paper. And there are two big reasons for it. There are huge barriers. There are many people who've done studies on property rights. Oxfam was one, Landesa is another one. Beena Agarwal, of course, has written a lot about the importance of having property for women. Not only does it improve productivity and the kinds of issues we're talking about, but really their well-being, welfare, everything that we're talking about in this conference. It's one of the few things that reduces violence against women. It actually improves the nutrition of children. So it has very widespread effects, and yet you don't really see it happening. So the law remains on paper, and I mean, there are two large reasons. Firstly, there's very little awareness about this law. So if you do surveys about it, really most women don't know that it's their right to actually have equal property. Inheritance is the main way in which people acquire property in India. And there are surveys that, if, again, Landesa and others have done, most women would like, obviously, to have property in their name. But then if you tell them that it's their right and why are they not really using that right, they don't want to, because it's not coming naturally from their fathers and brothers, they say that we need the security of our natal homes if something goes wrong in our marriage, you know. And if we have to take our brothers and fathers to court, we are not going to do that. So even where there is awareness, there is, if you have, because it's not happening automatically, they will not be taking their brothers to court. If you do, so again, if you look at these surveys, even where parents are willing to give to daughters, the brothers are strongly resistant. So where you find women getting their share, it's really in families that don't have sons. Unfortunately, I mean, this is a very sad thing that you know, brothers and fathers don't really want to share property with their daughters and sisters, but that is the reality. Where they do get some inheritance, it's usually not the same, much smaller share than their brothers. And social, I mean, so it's both the legal complexity of the legal issues, the lack of awareness, the complicated ways, but again, social customs such as dowry, for example. Women, I mean, even though dowry was actually made illegal in 1961, it's a very widespread practice. And everyone seems to partake of it quite happily. So it's really a social custom that is hard to change to the passage of a law. Most women think, well, this is what we are going to get out of our parents' property, so we might as well take whatever we are getting when we get married. But it's usually much, much less than the share that their brothers will get through actually inheriting the property. When they're taking that dowry, they're essentially writing off their right to claim any property later on. You know, so, and this is a practice that continues. It was being banned for other reasons because it was being demanded and poor families couldn't afford it, and it led to a lot of violence against women. But even in well-to-do families, it's actually disempowering the family, the girl, and it's disenfranchising her from her rights to property if she accepts a dowry. So I think that there's this very set of complex legal issues as well as this combination of social issues where the men think that it's really only their right to inherit property, which is why we are seeing such slow progress. You would need to do like a lot of awareness campaigns. Firstly, a lot of laws are passed and then that's it. You know, the domestic violence law remains another one on paper. Most people aren't even aware that it exists. The property rights is another one like that. It's been passed, but nobody's aware of it. Even the judicial and the panchayat officials or the admin officials, nobody's actually really aware of it, and nobody's actually reaching out to women at the grassroots level to inform them about their rights and to actually help them get access to these rights. So it's a very, very tough nut to crack, actually.
Nisha, maybe can I just follow up? And actually, we're kind of going into our second round now. I want to follow up on this. You're right, changing these norms is very difficult. Have you seen any examples at all anywhere, either in India or anywhere else, where some things, either it's social awareness campaigns or whatever the technique might be, that have begun at least to make some progress in shifting these norms and mindsets?
So, you know, I worked in Vietnam as well, and that was a very interesting example. Of course, it wasn't really private property. The government can play a bigger role there. But We did a poverty assessment and we took all the government officials around. They didn't used to believe that this was a big issue, that on the ownership certificate, only the man's name was on it. But then once they saw the burden that it imposed for women, either single women headed households or for access to credit and other issues, basically they just added the woman's name on the certificate, Now here that is also a problem in that if you can convince, firstly, you have to convince the men, but secondly, even if you say convince husbands to add their wives' names, it's considered as a fresh sale, right? So you have to actually pay the stamp duty and the registration tax again. Now, if one was to make that a policy change and abolish it and say adding the wife's name is not a fresh sale, I think that would be a very good policy measure to undertake that could facilitate it, because even the men know that when they're migrating to the villages, if the property is not in the women's name, that they're going to lose out in terms of getting access to any credit. Some states in India have made it easier for women. When they buy property, they pay smaller stamp duty and registration fee. And so then women are being encouraged to buy property, or the family is looking to buy property in the women's name. So obviously policies matter a lot. They can shift and break through these social norms. So even in India, in some states, you do see these kinds of examples. But it's not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very interesting that I was personally not aware of this, treating it as a fresh sale. I mean, it's putting it that way. It's almost a no-brainer, right? To not do that as a But of course, things things that seem obvious don't often get done. Let me now turn. Actually, this is also a question from the audience. Anita, maybe I can turn this to you, and it is about. We talked a lot of you talked about literacy. Farzana talked about literacy. Rahul did. You did as well. Can you talk a little bit about access to information as asymmetry? How do you get people to understand what this is all about? And in particular, I think one of the questions that has come through the chat is, rural areas. It's hard enough to do in urban areas, in schools, it's not taught yet, and so on. Have you seen, or do you have any ideas on how we can do this better, the financial literacy and reducing information asymmetry across the board, but in particular in rural areas? Anita, over to you.
Thanks. I think it's definitely possible, and we have some great examples of, self-help groups, microfinance institutions like Seva, and the work of also where smallholder farmers are being targeted. And as somebody mentioned earlier, a large number of them, because of migration, now there are women who are in that position. So I'm very optimistic, and I think we need a real concerted effort to sort of fix the information asymmetry between men and women. And as you and Farzana mentioned, also for men, especially in the rural areas, very often they don't know what their rights are. And in the urban areas, for example, among workers, there are a lot of programs that the government has on health, on safety, things like that, which they don't know about. What we're seeing is that this push on ESG and that a lot of financiers, so investors like, of course, earlier on the development institutions like IFC, World Bank, etc., had a requirement on different performance standards, which then forced their beneficiaries to make sure that such information is made available, that there's more parity in terms of access to finance, etc. So I think capital and people who have money can play a really big role. And one of the things that I've seen, for example, now that the S is being focused on, so very large financiers of, let's say, affordable housing or construction companies are making sure that their workers or workers involved in their industry are actually gaining that access and also availing of services that are already available. And some of them are even introducing new services. I don't know if you've heard, but there are about 15 institutions led by Thermax and others who've come together post the pandemic because of the situation of migrant labor, where they really started asking the tough questions as to we as industry, what's our role? Could we have prevented something like what happened during the pandemic in India? And I think that has led to, so they are developing something called a social compact, which is looking at very simple things like just even in terms of the workers, both men and women, do they get paid minimum wage? Do they have access to, food and shelter? And so very often in my investment career, we've come across situations where really workers, laborers on a construction site being promoted by very large construction companies would be packed into a container which was, very similar to bunk beds in a concentration camp. And this is taken as granted and, no ventilation, etc. So the focus on S in the ESG, I think as it grows, these kind of very basic things will have to start changing. But coming back to the access to finance, I think the point that Nisha just made of having title, it becomes very important. And this is again something that we've seen even in firms which are led by women. If the social norms prevent them from, taking their due rights in terms of being owners of assets. So something that is starting to be done. And just to give you an example, CDPQ created this diversity linked fund where it's companies that are actually promoting change in improving and increasing access to finance, knowing what their assets and collateral are, and having the ability to really bring all that together, are given preference over other types of companies. So I think my view is that if capital plays a responsible role, we can really bring about a change. The second aspect, which is equally important, is government policy, as Nisha just mentioned. And I think governments can do a lot more in terms of promoting more parity between men and women in access to finance.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Rahul, maybe I can turn to you quickly. I know we're getting a little bit short on time. What are, many of us should be playing a role in bridging disparity between men and women, whatever role, whatever position we are in. What are a few things that the audience can, or listening audience, or all of us can do starting right away if we're serious about making women financially independent?
So I'd like to just put it in the context of both a retail and institutional sort of context. So, and this also addresses the earlier point of information asymmetry. So let's just look at, and I'm trying to give a very grassroots sort of example here, and maybe it'll spark some thought of what we can do. I don't have any tangible suggestion there, but I'd like to share a grassroots example. So let's look at some categories of customers. So there are women customers, for example, who have previous history of formal borrowings, which will get reflected in a credit bureau score. Now, if that score is good, they have been responsible in terms of paying off the debts that they have taken. It empowers them, for further loan programs, etc., that they'd like to win. Then let's look at a second category, which is where the person is coming for the first time. And now, how do you even credit assess somebody like that? And that's where we feel giving these people, these women or men at the base of the pyramid, an opportunity to provide their information in a very unfiltered form, which is how will that money that they take really lead to income generation, etc. And taking that into context as opposed to only what is published data, or run the risk of excluding them, saying you have no data, so we can't take a risk on you. That's another element. And the third is when somebody has a credit history but is not a good one. And what we saw was that a lot of people at the base of the pyramid, it's not an intention issue. People are victims of circumstance because they are low income, they are poor, and something may have happened that they could not service their previous loan on time. Now, do you now penalize them for the rest of their lives? Or you take into account the social trust signals and say, okay, that happened to you at a period of time, but you seem to have overcome that. There's no intent issue, and we will accord that facility to you or extend that facility. So that, I think, is more of a sort of grassroots sort of example of what each one of us can do. But I would say one thing is, for example, in India, a lot of us, have people who help us in our, at our homes, our drivers and, helpers, etc. How can we ensure that we help them build a digital financial footprint? There are many times we are continuously giving them loans and we know they pay well, they mean well, but it's not getting recorded anymore. So that's one thing I think from a retail perspective we can do. From an institutional perspective, I'm seeing some very positive signs, which is any of the sort of investors, our existing investors or potential investors, they're always now talking about, since we're in the business of financial inclusion, they're always talking to us about what is your specific gender strategy. And not only in terms of the target group, but also in terms of internally. What are the metrics you're measuring yourself against the workforce and gender equality in your company at a board level? So I think these are, and that clearly links to sort of how you unlock the right kind of capital, because investors are becoming quite conscious of asking these questions, and these are not tick mark questions. People actually mean it. So, that is sort of on the institutional side.
Thank you, Farzana. Let me bring you in on the last, maybe a quick brief thing. Actually, something that Rahul said about, when the case of people who may have bad credit for whatever reason, including things that are beyond their control, which of course then brings me to insurance and how insurance products could have helped. Anyway, let me ask you, how do we motivate others in the insurance or banking system to take measures, to support women in the way that you have done? What are some of the, really evocative hooks that we can use?
Well, we do roadshows and other trainings. Mentoring is another way, to actually help women to understand, first, maybe she was handling only 1 lakh taka or 1 lakh rupee loan, but, when she's jumping from 1 to 20, so how she can utilize those funds. So she needs those trainings. So she needs mentoring. And the other thing that really worked is the multi-stakeholder approach. Because, when you have partnerships, that's how, you can grow, you can motivate. Like people, like women always goes for like, okay, there is an access to finance. So then she comes from the insurance. So the banks and the insurance and the telcos, and also the MFS, the mobile financial services platform, where we can, we have a seamless situation where we actually claim, pay our claims also. And the bank loans are also given through that channel. So this is how we work together and try to understand and make the process easier for women. So this is how we're trying to motivate, and also recognizing those women who are actually doing well, those, because mainly we tie with banks, so they're taking like first loan and then going into the second level and then going into the corporate level. So these are like the the migration of those, upgradation of those women's livelihood. So we try to showcase them and into a case study, and also to understand what was the failure. There are women there, they went through failures, and without the failures, they don't it's actually men and women both. So without the failures, you don't really learn. So that takes into account into the product pricing, and also the other process, the value added services. So that really helped us. And of course, bringing the stakeholders like chambers, and if you go to the mass level, you need a proper distribution channel. So you need to work with MFIs, development organizations, or cooperative banks, or those women councils who really have influence in their neighborhood. So we try to make those people our agents, so they actually motivate those women who are not really aware of the products or aware of the benefits. Like for instance, for the crop insurance segment, where we do give weather insurance, weather-based index insurance product, we saw that more than 50% women are actually owning, not owning, they're actually managing. So their spouse is actually owning the land, but they're the person who is actually heading the whole, they're doing the work. So what we try to do is try to kind of bring in their spouses and get them into that, okay, the woman can be the owner too. So in Bangladesh, if the land is registered, that's a good thing that our Prime Minister has done. If the land is registered under a woman's name, so the spouse or any other cousins or any man cannot, take it away or file a case against her. The will doesn't work. So it has to be, whatever it is, it has to be registered. So what we do trainings. We have a panel of lawyers who actually give the awareness training of the inheritance right. Women, they don't have any information about what she can inherit, from their parents' side, or also when their spouse dies, what happens, and how that can accumulate their assets, and that can help generating more capital for their business. So this is very important. So you need to have a kind of a more of a roundtable discussion, and kind of it's like a more educational session where we bring in those women who are benefited out of that, and those women who are failing, so they kind of communicate with each other and in their languages. So this is how, you need to talk to the opinion leaders who can make actually influence those women. So it's kind of joining the dots. So the women platform, that's how the Talenormin works also. We do mentor professionals and entrepreneurs. So it's kind of we are helping each other. Without that, I mean, if we do that, I don't think we need 150 years to empower the women. And of course, men and women complement each other. So in an organization, we need 50% men, 50% women. In a business, a woman needs a man also to help her out in terms of business strategy, in terms of making the financial statements, and in the operations level, and also pricing the product. So sometimes they don't know the invisible costs those are actually accumulating in the pricing. So they need to understand that thing. So they need men too. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzana. Actually, let me do a point of housekeeping. Can someone on the organizing group tell us how much time we have left?
Hi, ma'am. You have about 5 minutes left now.
Okay, great. I saw Nisha, sorry, confusing the two. Nisha, you were nodding when Farzana was talking about what she was just talking about now. Did you want to add anything on, bringing, sort of spreading the word amongst women and so on?
Yeah, I think that is how social change would come about. Basically, I mean, it's through collective action. So it's not ever going to be one individual, but all the people here working with self-help groups, for example, they could introduce an element on legal literacy or knowledge about these inheritance laws. I think what Farzana was saying is very positive, that basically it's about raising awareness. But I think this is an issue that doesn't only affect poor people and rural people. Unfortunately, what you look at is it's across the board. It's everyone sitting in our conference today. If you were to look at them, even there isn't equality of property, right? I attended a conference, Al Gore's conference on climate change, and we had to sign a pledge when you went in to say that I will show this presentation to 10 other people. I think that is the kind of action one needs. If there are 400 people, we were told on day one, and 40% are men. If all those men in there could take a pledge that they will now go back and think about sharing property equally with their wives, with their sisters, with their daughters, and persuade 10 other men to do the same, I think you would start a movement. Same thing with women. It's very, very tough. They can't take it on because as long as their fathers and brothers are not willing to give them the fair share, they don't want to make that trade-off between family and property. But at least to start that conversation, the burden is also on women to take up these tough issues. Raise it with your fathers, raise it with your brothers, and make sure at the very least that when you are giving your property to your sons and daughters, you're giving it equally to daughters. So I think this is how movements start. Each woman in this conference influences 10 other women. Each man does the right thing and influences 10 other men. And you have already thousands of people who would be bringing about change. This Talentnomics calls itself ripples of change. I mean, I can't think of a more important ripple of change that is needed in India today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisha. Before I wrap, let me give Rahul, as the sole man on this panel, a word, and then I'll wrap up.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you well, Kalpana.
I was just saying, I wanted to give you the last word on anything that you wanted to touch on before I wrapped up.
I think I'll just allude to what Nisha said, which is everything starts with a ripple of change. And, how do we sort of morph that into more collective actions and not settle for change at linear pace? I mean, I think the world is changing fast, and I think we need to accelerate change. So we need to collectively do things that will make, change at scale. So if I could just leave with one sort of thing that we all can think about constantly is change at scale.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Rahul, and thank you to the audience for sending in some good questions and so on. Let me try to wrap a little bit, and I'll pick up on a few things that you all said. Scale. I mean, and Rahul, you mentioned it. I think we're at the point where we should no longer expect the change to be linear, and that at some point, and that's an unpredictable point, but it will be exponential. And I actually am a firm believer that digital technologies hold the key to doing that. And I know that there's still issues with access. I know that there's still issues with putting devices in people's hands. I know there's still issues with once you put the device in somebody's hands, to give them content that they understand in their language. Farzana, you mentioned languages. I know that, but I do, we're seeing it. We're seeing it in our children and in the younger generation, the adoption, the innovation, the ability to scale. And I think, we at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been supporting this kind of thing, first in financial services for the poor, but now really across the board, including public financial management, raising revenues, managing expenditures, delivering health services, and so on. So I think in terms of the scale, but also the speed at which the scale is achieved, I hold great hope for digital literacy and digital tools. That said, I was also struck by something that all of you touched on, which is that many governments actually have been making changes, whether it's property or whether it's dowry or whether it's violence against women, including domestic violence. But somehow or the other, that hasn't permeated first in terms of information and then in terms of mindset change, right? So what is it that we can do? I mean, I have some very good examples of work in Africa where an organization called IBP, the International Budget Partnership, is actually developing small groups of civil service, of communities, usually women. So let's say an example is in Senegal, where there were women who were in a community who were concerned about water supply, something similar, something simple. Were given data on, were given information on how to collect data on how much water comes, when it comes, how often it comes, so on. And then they were enabled to take it to the government, local government, to say, hey, this is what's happening. Governments are giving them information on budgets, and it became a partnership that worked at a very grassroots level on sharing information of the changes that have occurred, what rights people have, what information they need to transmit, and so on. So I think there's a very powerful and maybe slightly underexploited area there where we can empower the communities that are, in this case, women, but also men who benefit from these changes, to know about these changes and to learn from them. And Farzana, you mentioned, roundtables where you bring people who have benefited to talk to others and so on. The other thing that struck me was how financial access and so on, including with Rani Ben's story about, then leads automatically to the woman being seen as a leader. She said she's invited to, participate in leadership, not leadership, but as a community leader in events and so on. And so that's happening organically. People recognize her as a leader, which is truly very amazing. So I'm leaving here with lots of hope, and lots of practical. I think one of the things that when we were planning for this event was what can people walk away with in terms of what they can do. And I think I've only listed a few. You guys have listed a lot more, but I'm leaving with hope that we can really be hoping that we're seeing the beginning of a big and accelerated change. And finally, as Nisha said, let's all go and transmit to at least 10 people what we've learned today, and especially the wonderful videos that you all produced. Thank you very much. Thanks all. Thank you to the organizers.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much, Kalpana. Bye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kocher. And a massive, massive thank you to all our panelists for this wonderful session and for sharing these valuable insights with us. I would also like to mention that Farzana Chaudhary and Anita George are on the Talebenomics Advisory Board. I hope that the participants have gained some new perspective on how wealth disparity affects us and how we can work on closing the wealth gap and build equity in wealth, so both men and women can live a life of dignity at their age. Before we move towards the end of the day, please have a look at the poll results. And now Nikita should be with you shortly.
Thank you.